it's the long game. It's the long game. I'm you know I can throw it to you like it's sort of like 15 years after the publication of my first book to say I can sort of see what I've been doing from a bit of a distance, but when I was in it I couldn't see the forest for the trees. Yeah.
Huh.
So pick your ideas carefully. If you've got a banger and the skill set is there, go for it, execute. If you go for it, but you can feel it yourself, like, nah, this isn't quite working out, put it in the drawer. You'll come back to it in a couple of years and you know exactly, like this book that I'm telling you about. I did a first draft, 40,000 words. I was grinding my way through it. But even I could feel like it's not popping. But when I finally did it, I had a sense of flow unlike anything else I've experienced. I was like, yeah, because I changed the structure, I changed something about the characters. And that's the craft. So there is an intentionality, a self-awareness to it. You're supposed to, even as you write, you're your critic, like right in the back seat, maybe in the sunken place, if we're gonna use the get out terminology. There's got to be like the Shama back there. There's the Shama who's driving, but there's the Shama in the sunken place who's assessing everything and thinking, is this working out?
Wow, that clears a lot of confusion. Hmm.
Yeah, and it never stops. Even now, I sort of know what I want to do novel wise over the next couple of years, but there's a book I've sort of like punted forward to say, okay, I might attempt this in the 2030s because I have to go about read certain texts. It's a war novel, so I need to sort of like. I loved books like Birdsong by Sebastian Faulks and stuff, but I really need to then read sort of like military texts, do my historical research, read more war novels. And that's about a 5 year commitment in which I learn before I attempt to write the book. So you're always playing the long game. And
Okay.
yeah.
Huh.
But in the meantime, fill that time up, experiment radically, like especially in the short form, short fiction. And one thing I always say, Shama, is whatever your stick is, whatever it is you enjoy, you need to stretch yourself outside of that. So look at crime magazines, write crime stories, because you're gonna have to sort out your plotting and your pacing in crime, and you're gonna have to make sure that your prose, if your prose is like ornate, very literary, you're gonna have to pare that shit down for a crime story to make sure it's tight and it's effective. And then if you read masters of the genre like Chandler, Hammett, Jim Thompson, it will give you a skill set that years down the line you integrate into your other stuff. If you're doing science fiction and fantasy, you've got to build entire worlds.
Aha.
So that world building, even if you go down to your literary novel, you are going to be able to describe space, landscapes, and stuff much better. And then if you're doing your interiority, you do your literary fiction short stories. So focus on psychology and things like that. Then eventually down the line, we're looking at 5, 10 years time, all these elements they synthesize. And then you're able to deploy sort of like different weapons for whatever story you decide to turn your hand to. It's the long game, Shama.
The
It's you've got to
long
play the
game.
long game. We all sort of get wowed by early instant success, and it's great when it happens, and it's beautiful when it happens. There is the writers that are geniuses. They have a form, they have a style. What you find is the way that they work is from the first novel they build up depth. There's certain writers that you pick up and they have a voice and they have a style, and you can see over the years that they've been just going deeper and deeper into their thing. The other way to do it is horizontally, which is what I did, which is to pick up different styles and different forms and just to broaden out horizontally. And that's a different approach. So but it just goes with your temperament, but the craft gets better over time with constant practice.
I'm going to ask this question forward because I actually wrote this down. What is your writing regimen like? What life processes do you do by yourself, and which ones do you outsource to other people to be able to write as much as you have? Because 7 novels, all right, 8 novels if you add an untimely love, because I didn't even know that there was an untimely love, and I've been
Yeah,
looking
yeah,
for that. I was so that's 8 novels in the span of 16 years. Okay, no, that's 15 years. That
yeah.
is 1 novel in 2 years. That's something, bro. So like I just wanted to know, like, what's your regimen like?
I feel old, man. Yeah, you make me feel so old. It's changed over time, because who you are as a writer, it morphs and it changes over time, and the work that you produce also changes. If we go back to when I started, this would have been about 2003 that I wrote my first manuscripts. Back then, I was deep into Russian literature: Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Turgenev, Lermontov, Gogol, and those kind of writers. I was really into the novel of ideas. So the first manuscript I ever wrote was a book called Notes from a Dying People, which was riffing off Dostoevsky's The Devils. Right. I've said this often before. I think Dostoevsky is the great Zimbabwean writer because there's so many parallels to 19th century Russia, between 19th century Russia and 21st century Zimbabwe. And I saw those in his text and I thought, oh, I can adapt this. But my skill set wasn't there. I was also trying out someone else's voice and style. And this is what you do when you're young and you're imitating. Think about a musician, right? You've got musicians that you love. So you might try that style, but it never quite works because you've got to find your own voice and your own shtick. But nothing was wasted then. You
Mm.
know, what I discovered then, for example, Dostoevsky's characters aren't really people, they're ideas incarnate. But when I tried the same thing, my characters would just look like puppets. They didn't have the same psychological depth. I was young, I hadn't lived, I didn't have the skill. But still, I tried it. So that's something in the toolkit. I've done a full length novel. I've banked it there. I did a couple of others that I was still deeply into what Dostoevsky had done. Completely didn't work. Things only worked for me sort of like Christmas Day 2009 when I had a voice in my head. I knew there was something not quite right about Dumisani the very first time I ever laid eyes on him. The problem is I couldn't tell what it was. Thank God for that. Like this was a woman's voice. It's a weird feeling, Shama. You're hearing some lady talk inside of your head, and so your consciousness has to completely reorientate to this thing that's possessing you. But who's this woman? What's her stick? What's the story? Who's Dumisani? Got a laptop and I started typing away. And at the time, I had a copy of Sarah Ladipo Manyika's Independence. Manyika, what a writer, man. What a writer. But I knew if I'm going to write in a woman's voice, I need sort of like a metronome to regulate what I'm doing. Otherwise, it won't work.
Mm.
So I'll do a chapter of my own work, read a bit of Independence, get back into my own thing. And because I was young, I was doing 5,000 words a day. It was pretty quick. Because I was so afraid I was going to lose the voice. Because this is the thing that happens when I write, especially when I do a first person narration. The consciousness that I'm writing from inhibits me so fully that if you email me, you might find I'll reply you in a strange syntax that doesn't sound anything like me because I'm working in that particular mode, that particular voice. And it's also one of the struggles later on that I've had while doing the Edinburgh Night series. I couldn't listen to the audiobooks because the audio narrator has their own sort of like rhythms of speech, their own cadence. So I couldn't listen to that because I had a very specific voice in my head. So I do the hairdresser of Harare, boom, 2 weeks. This is easy. I can work for 2 weeks in the year, take 50 weeks off. That's a career. Hardly. I was fortunate that Weaver Press took it on. There was a lot of editing to do on the text. And I was working with Irene Staunton. Again, the joys of being a male writer, working with a female editor who take out some of those kinks in your prose. That's very, very important. and the editing process was brutal. But we came up with something that I think is pretty dope. So I thought, okay, I've
Hmm.
got the formula, I've got this thing that I do, but the next novel that I did took me 3 years. The Maestro, the Magistrate, and the Mathematician. This is because you've got a factory and you make a particular product. Let's say you're making cell phones, and then the order comes in, and it's like you've got to make desktop PCs. You've got to retool the entire factory, the register that you're working in, the voice, the style, the form of the novel has to change as well. That completely messed me up because I had this voice, I had this first person thing. Now I'm having to change to sort of like third person, intimate, sort of like limited point of view. Three novellas in one. And the reason that novel is structured is, had I been a superior craftsman, I could have done like a conventional novel that integrates all three characters and it works. Because I couldn't do that, I had to split the novel into three novellas that kind of run alongside one another. The reason I did this, and there's a wonderful sort of like YouTube thing that I'd watched some time ago by David Mitchell. You know him, Cloud Atlas, brilliant writer. David Mitchell sort of like argued that when you're a writer, the things that you're not good at become your style. Because when you're not good at something in particular, you have to work around that. An example that I might give you is Alain Mabanko. Now, Alain Mabanko's books are tight and they're dope. The voice, the humor. But have you ever seen Alain Mabanko describe like a mountain or hill or rivers or landscapes? Nah, he's just honed in. Again, the reason his novels are short and tight is because Mabanko doesn't really do scenic descriptions. Now, he's a very capable writer. It might just be a stylistic choice. I would really, really hesitate to say he can't do it. I think he's very conscious about what he's doing and how he's doing these novels. Because if you think about Broken Glass, if you expand it with all these other things, I think the thing falls apart. So he's got something that he enjoys doing. But again, for me, it that becomes the style. So you take away the stuff, I'll work in this direction, and that becomes. I'm constantly aware of that. I'm aware of where I have deficiencies in craft, but I know how to sort of like mitigate those things. If to use a football analogy, right? If you've got someone who's young and they're really fast and they can cover the ground, think of a player like N'Golo Kante. I'm a Chelsea fan. Prime N'Golo Kante. He was all over the pitch, right? He could make a mistake and correct it because he could cover the ground. If you don't have that speed and that work ethic, you're gonna need vision. You're gonna need to read the game to be in the right place at exactly the right time because you don't have the pace to cover ground. Writers are similar. Your style is a product of your deficiencies. It's not what you're good at. At least
Hmm.
that's how I've taken what Mitchell said.
Okay, at
Yeah,
least I'm on the right
and
track.
and you do that, and then the next couple of years you can actually pick up the skills to make up for that thing that you've realized, like, and you'll get it. And
Hmm.
then the next novel, you're dealing with another deficiency because no writer is perfect. You solve that problem, but there's another set of problems that you pick up, and that's how you develop in the craft. Yeah.
Still talking about the craft, because I think one of the things I noted when reading from Hairdresser of Harari to the Maestro, the Magistrate, and the Mathematician, I think I wrote in my note, I was like, did he attend an MFA between these two books? you know, yeah, because the craft was different to say the least. In the Maestro, the Magistrate, and the Mathematician, I call it the M and the M. It crackles to life. Like the Magistrate is this classic, literary fiction style. It has like it's put in a container. There are quotes. For the Mathematician, I was seeing numbers in the middle. I was seeing that this character looked at the world through numbers and was not literary enough. So that was reflected in the writing. For the Maestro, it was very, very stream of consciousness. I was like, okay, he has read the Russians. And then I looked at interviews, I was like, he's read the Russians. So so I could see that. So I wanted to ask, like, was there an MFA between those? And even when we get to the Library of the Dead, I think the first two chapters I read, it felt like a different writer. Like, and this was 6 years at the line. So what happened between, 2010 to 2014, then from like 2015 to 2019. Like what did you do
It's pretty much the story of my career. Now,
exactly?
MFA courses, creative writing workshops, I
Hmm.
really recommend those. The problem that I have is when I came in, I didn't even know those things existed. I didn't know any authors, so I just bought books on craft and sort of did my own thing. So that's the older route, the authentic route. The price you pay for going down the route that I went is, if I look at my first novels, if I was on a course, there would have been someone looking off my shoulder that says, well, you need to fix this, you need to do that, because it can be very difficult for you when you're so close to the text to understand where the issues are. And so you blunder along until something clicks. Whereas if you're constantly workshopping and you're talking craft with other people, you tweak
Hmm.
things a lot faster. So that's a great route. But most
Hmm.
writers, if we look at history, the MFA is a recent invention. I think what started in the 60s or something like that. It's fairly recent. So there's the older way of doing it, which is trial and error. You've got to have your own R&D department. And there was a time I was listening to this guy on BBC Radio 4 who was a pharmacologist. And in his
Hmm.
long career, he had tried thousands upon thousands of different compounds and only managed to create one medicine that went to market. And that's what made him a multimillionaire. So the other route, you have to build in a huge tolerance for failure. And this is what a lot of writers struggle with. I'm fortunate that I've worked in call centers. Now, when you work in a call center and you're doing market research, you're phoning people up to do surveys. And most people will tell you to fuck off. They don't want to talk to you. They don't give you the time of day. And you're in the phone for an hour and maybe you talk to one person. So I really got used to people saying no. And I understood that the value is in the one person that says yes. So I had shifts where I'll do a 4 hour shift. And in that 4 hours, God knows how many, because we had like computers dialing for us. It was automatic. And you'd have loads
Hmm.
of people just telling you no, and maybe at the third hour, someone says yes. You do the survey for 10, 15 minutes, and you go back to no, no, no. So I'm very tolerant of failure. We have a bad relationship with failure in the sense that we don't realize that anything that you do, right? If you've done it, Shama, and it doesn't work, what do you get out of it? Now you know what doesn't work, which is crucial. I've
Hmm.
learned more from my failures than I have from my successes because, well, success it works, but just knowing those elements, that the stories that don't sell, etc., the voices that you can't really get across, that's very very useful information. And I got this from the call center where you'd go there with your timesheet and the supervisor like, oh, great job, yeah, this is a very difficult survey, and the time of day that we're calling, people are busy, so yeah, well done you for getting that one person to say yes. So between the hairdresser, which is like a first person narration, really pacey, short chapters, riffs off genre chicklet, I needed something new for the second book. And that's why it took me
Hmm.
so long, because I really had to start looking at, I mean, the structure that I used for it, Paul Auster's New York trilogy, right? The three novellas in the New York trilogy, the way he structured his work is like you've got the first novella, and I forget what the name is City of Glass or something like that. I forget the names of the novellas. It's been a while. What I did is break my three titular characters into three and then have sort of like alternating characters, but each one has their own style. As you've noted, the Maestro has his own style, the mathematician, etc. And when I did that, the thing actually worked for me. But the price
Hmm.
that you pay for that is the reader who's gone in, who's enjoyed the hairdresser offer, I might look at it and say, what the fuck is this? Again, like if I had gone the other career route of like building depth, right, I could have had a stack of novels doing something similar. I would have built a brand. You would know that, this is the voice that we get, this is the story Huchu does. So I do something different, something that's a little bit more experimental in terms of its style and structure. But at the same time, I'm publishing crime stories. I'm publishing SFF stories. I'm doing literary fiction stories. bifurcated my career as TL Huchu and Tendai Huchu, right? And so I've got all these things going on, and this is because of my impulses. Now, one of the things I'll tell you is the Maestro, the Magistrate, and the Mathematician. It was rejected by my prior publishers. I went to lunch with one of my publishers, and he was like, Tendai, we did very well with the hairdresser of Harare. Readers will only give you a certain range. This is not it. And so the idea was, let's build on this thing that you're doing. Now, I was crushed at the time. Looking back in my middle age, he had a very good point. You build a brand, you do the thing over and over, you deepen, and your readership grows. So the price I paid was the Maestro, the Magistrate, and the Mathematician sold far less than the hairdresser of Harare did. And now I'm off doing all this other genre stuff. Like, are you a serious literary author, or what's going on? Again, you have to be willing to make new relationships, build new bonds. As I'm working on this, I'm discovering other things, but each novel that I do presents a new problem for me. So after the Maestro, the Magistrate, and the Mathematician, I did a manuscript called O, which was really modernist, stream of conscious, fractured, kind of echoes of Virginia Woolf. It was a cyclical story with like broken timestamps. It was an experimental novel. It leaned in much harder than the Maestro, the Magistrate, and the Mathematician. I did it. I sent it out. My publishers were like, "Nah, no, no. Like, who's going to buy this?" And I get it. It was a dense, difficult read that the reader would have to do a lot of work, and they would have to accept sort of like ambiguity because it was written from within a consciousness. There was no plot. It was just one character having hallucinations and stuff like that. It was very interesting, but I learned a lot from it. But what I also learned is what the market could not tolerate. Right? I'm still very proud of the work. It's a manuscript that's in my archives at the National Library of Scotland. The archives kind of forced me to look back at my career. Because I was so, obviously, rejection is so, it stings. Now, I told you I have a very high tolerance for failure, but it still stings. But I'm able to sort of like detach myself from that. So I hadn't read it in a very long time. But when I looked at it, I was like, you know what? I don't think it's that bad. But still, it's a novel that would not sell a lot of copies because it doesn't have the things that it doesn't have the plot and the characters, and it's really dense and dark. But I picked up a lot of new skills from it. So I'm able to fragment structure. I did another novel called All the Beautiful Things Sorrow Brings, which is kind of riffing off the autofictional mode, a road trip novel, really expansive, but focused on places people don't normally go. And it's a novel about grief and sorrow, but without a resolution, right? Because most works about grief, it's kind of like how it's going to be okay. But in that particular novel, the idea that I had was it's something that you just have to sit with. It doesn't necessarily have to go away and you transcend it and everything is okay. There's no catharsis at the end of it. Again, it's emotionally a very raw novel that no publisher would take on. I was still fine with it, but again, this is a different mode, a different style, a different voice, a different tone. So I shelved them. Then I did the Edinburgh Nights series, urban fantasy. It's a genre with its own conventions. It's got readers that know what they want, all right? So you've got to structure it differently. You're using that stuff that I was doing in crime short stories that I published in Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, in Mystery Weekly, in Black Mama, in Thuglit, in Retreats from Oblivion, those noir magazines. I'm now able to take elements of sort of like investigative fiction and fuse them into urban fantasy. I'm now able to world build because of the stories that I've published in Omenana and Lightspeed and all those other magazines. So I can build worlds, I can do crime fiction, fuse them, and that's how you get the Edinburgh Nights series. You've got a young 15-year-old girl, that witty voice of Wimbai from way back. I can do that. I tweak it because she's a Scottish girl. So I'm working with language. I've done stories like I have a story called 20p Domino that came out in the Glasgow Review of Books, which is written in Scots vernacular. So I can play around with the voice. I can create a completely new new voice, something that I wouldn't have been able to do in 2010 or in 2015. So you see how those things start coming together, and then I do a series. What am I learning from doing a series? I can sustain a narrative over an arc of 5 books. Whereas before I could only do a
Hmm.
standalone novel, now I can build the world over like 5 different novels. And each of them is a little bit different. The third in the series, The Mystery at Dunvegan Castle, that's a locked room mystery. So the others are sprawled through Edinburgh. The character travels a lot. And this third book, it's like one of those, those cozy mysteries where it's like just a bunch of people, like Knives Out. So just a bunch of people in a mansion and stuff is happening. So I do that for the third novel. So it's constant play, constant play, and I did that. I finished that. From that, what I've been working on now, what I've just sent to my agent is mythic, historical, epic fantasy. I've been working on the Edinburgh Nights series. Pretty much, I wrote the first book around 2018. So this is about 8 years. Now, I've got Ropa Moyo's voice, her register, her vocabulary, her cadence, her style, the pacing. I've been doing that for a while. I know how to do that. The manager comes in, we have to do a different project. We have to strip everything out. And that's why I struggled with that first draft that I told you about, up to 40,000 words, because I've set this thing in sort of like an analog of the great Zimbabwe Empire. Ropamoyo's voice doesn't work for that at all. That's contemporary, those colloquialisms and stuff like that. They totally don't work. So I have to find a new register and a new style. My solution for that was to kind of fuse elements of the epic, the Iliad, the Sundiata Keita, Window, those old epics with that oral cadence, fuse it into this, and you have something new. So constantly, each novel for me is a new problem. But again, working in that way has costs, because there'll be people that read Ropamoyo, that read this voice that I'm doing, and they're just like, what is this? Where's the great urban fantasy that you gave us before? So you have to be able to accept the cost if you're working in this mode.
You explained your writing regimen, and now you said some new things, and I'm like, I've updated the speed to a novel each year. Okay, that's good. That's good. That's good.
The way to do it, Chama, is just to treat it like work, right? So if you're an artist or a genius, you wait for inspiration. Inspiration comes to you, and then you're produced. If you're like me, I'm an artisan. This is just work. My job is to serve the story. And therefore, I turn
Oh,
up. And even on bad days, the days when I will sit on my laptop, stare at the white blank page, and do a couple of lines, but I will still sit there at the time that I've allocated to write. Think about it like you work, right? There's days when you slack off, but you still got to be at your desk, man, because the man is paying you by the hour. And that's how I treat it. It's like, even if I'm not feeling it, I will still sit there with the laptop on my legs and take the breaks at the time that I take them, and then clock off, and I'll be like, yeah, that was a slack day, but I still turned off. But eventually, what I find is the more I do it, my mind now has a choice. Am I just going to sit here and stare at this laptop all day? Or maybe if I tell the story, then that's going to be a bit more entertaining than just sitting there looking at this, blinking cursor on the Word document. And so eventually work starts. But another important part of the process for me, apart from turning up, is kind of the realization that as a writer, we're in our heads all the time, Shama. You've got these ideas and they're turning around, and it's great and it's fantastic. But we are physical beings, right? The body has its own demands. It's that medieval thing of the difference between the angel and the beast. And human beings, we embody both that. And it's so great to be caught up in your head and in your ideas, and
yeah.
they're great, but you've got to look after the body. If you want the mind to work properly, you've got to look after the body. So running has become a huge part of my writing practice. Like in the
Hmm.
mornings, I go out, I do a run, so I give the gods
Hmm.
of the flesh their due. And when I sit down, I'm a lot calmer, I'm a lot more relaxed, and the ideas. But you've got to look after the body because this gray piece of meat that's inside of your head that's generating all this, it is still just meat, and you have to look after it. Um,
Hmm.
so that's part of the running is intimately tied to the writing. Ideas, the body, they're not separate.
Whew. Wow, that's a lot. Okay. Okay. Um, I would just get to turn the conversation a little bit to the city of
Please do,
Edinburgh.
please do.
Okay. Okay. So, in I took so many lines from the Maestro, the Magistrate and the Mathematician. I'm going to call the name in full. I think so. About Edinburgh, you wrote in Edinburgh, the sun is this cold disk, distant, vague, powerless. For much of the year, it is hidden behind grey clouds, and when it did come out in its brilliance, it felt awkward, alien. So my question is, what was so fascinating about Edinburgh that you captured it so well in this novel? Like when the magistrate takes a walk, we are going from the street, we are going past the bridge. I'm seeing the names of places I don't know. When the maestro runs, and he just said something about running, we basically get a map of the city. There's even a map of the city there. And I was wondering what was so fascinating about Edinburgh that you captured that. That's one. And then the second question is how similar is it to Bindura? You know, you start to juxtapose both places from the first chapter there. So
That's a really profound and interesting question. And the good thing we're having this conversation now is I've had nearly a decade to think about this.
yeah,
So I moved to Edinburgh as a student studying podiatry, and at the time, I'm young, I've got energy. Most of my view of Edinburgh was the nightlife, partying, etc. That's what I was into at the time. I even had a full head of hair and dreadlocks like you. I could have
yeah,
been you in a different in a different time period, Shama. So if you look at the hairdresser of Ferrari, yes, it has some scenic descriptions of the cityscape, but they're not as dense as in the Maestro, the Magistrate, and the Mathematician.
politician,
Now,
yeah.
there's this fantastic book called Resisting Novels by Leonard J. Davis. Davis is sort of like I think a Marxist theorist, and he makes this wonderful argument. He says that if you think about the modern novel, this thing that we do of describing place and time in
Hmm.
scenes, the three-dimensional world rendered in words, is really, really an awkward thing. If you look at old documents by people traveling, right, whether they're explorers or they're merchants, etc., they'll say, well, we went to Baghdad. It has high walls. They have a lot of gold. It was very practical knowledge that you got from them, but they wouldn't really flesh out the world for you. It just wasn't a thing. And he argued that this enters the novel with Robinson Crusoe, right? Because what happens then is you've got empire, colonialism happening, and you've got people going to different parts of the world. Now, you want to write a novel about somewhere else. If you're an English writer and you write a forest in Nottinghamshire, everyone knows what a forest in Nottinghamshire looks like. You don't need to waste time
Hmm.
on descriptions. So in Robinson Crusoe, there was this need to describe the landscape because the reader wouldn't know what it looks like. They had no chance of going out to the Americas to see any of that, right? And so I looked at this thing. So it's intimately tied, at least in Davis's opinion, it's really tied to empire. And now we kind of expect it in every novel that we get that the writer must give us must at least set the scene in their prose. So, but when I look at it, thinking about my readership, if the reader is in Harare and I'm writing about Edinburgh, I really have to flesh out the world. Edinburgh is an exotic place. It's grey, it's gothic, it's gloomy. If I write about a church in Edinburgh, I kind of have to show it because we construct our churches differently in Zimbabwe. So I have to show what that looks like, and that's how this becomes a crucial element of the text. But even even within all those things, I mean, we're still on planet Earth, because of the colonial history. There are little instances where you find similarities, because Zimbabwe itself is a very, you know, historically it's a recent construct that was built by these guys on their adventures. So you see so many parallels, like even kind of historically, politically. Scotland, what's been the biggest Scottish issue in the last sort of like 2 decades? The question of Scottish independence. We had to have that in Zimbabwe. Land reform is big in Scotland, right? Because most of the land here is owned by wealthy aristocrats. You know, they had the Highland clearances where they moved the local people of the land so that these English lords and stuff could take over the highlands and run them. And they still hold the land. So the things that we get in Zimbabwe, they were experimented here, and they're like, oh yeah, you know what, we can just kick people off and they'll suck it up. And then we put pieces of paper and we say, look, I've got the title deeds. And you go to court, and it will be our guys at the court that will say, but there's a piece of paper here. Where's your piece of paper that says you own this land? So this was all, the experiments were done here. And a lot of the brutality that we find out in quote unquote the colonies is things that they experimented with here, and then they took them out and they expanded them. So you start seeing those historical similarities, and that's how you end up getting sort of like these fusions. Yeah.
I think this even preempts my next question, because I was going to ask if there was like a strong link, how strong the link was between the countries of Zimbabwe, and Scotland, essentially. Because in the Maestro, the Magistrate and the Magician, there is even the MDC, which is sort of like a national representation of Zimbabwe in Scotland. They have presidents and they sort of have some effect. And then in the Edinburgh Night series, Ropa uses an Imbira, which is basically Zimbabwean. So how strong is this link? Like, and how has this community fed, ever since like 2014?
So all those things were there. You're the guys that were like revolutionaries when they were out here, and it's like, yeah, you wouldn't be that revolutionary if you were in Harare. But you know what? Wear your beret. Big up to you, man. It's,
Oh,
you've got to laugh. It has a comical element. Part of the whole diaspora experience is you take a bit of home with you, and you feel
yeah.
a sense of that disconnection, etc. And people try to hold on to what they can, even if it's just this idea that I'm making a contribution from out here. I'm battling the man and the system. It's, in a way, it almost becomes a religious practice, right? It's how you maintain some semblance of connection, but it is comical when you look at it. There's a really big difference between the Zimbabwean characters in the Maestro, the Magistrate, and the Mathematicians, and Ropa Moyo in the Edinburgh Nights series. Because Ropa Moyo just doesn't give a fuck about any of that. For her, the mbira, there's nothing particularly special about it. It's an instrument her gran used to talk to ghosts, and she uses it for her job. If I look at the direction my work has been moving, and it's towards greater sovereignty, removing the need to explain anything. Because if we look at how our canon has evolved, right? Achebe, Soyinka, all those giants, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the whole idea of writing back. Now, this was very, very important work, but it was a
Hmm.
defensive posture, right? You've been attacked. So you've got to explain shit to the center. Like Achebe is saying, you guys said we had no laws, we had no culture, no civilization, but I'm showing you that we had our own thing going on. Now that was essential work, and that opens up the ground for the rest of us to be able to do what we do. So it's very important, right? So if you're attacked, someone's got to run defense, right? And someone's got to hold the
Hmm.
line in order for you guys to organize yourself to be able to go forward. And those giants that we talk about, man, the shit that they did, it's the only reason the rest of us are here, right? But time has moved on. But what's ossified is, and I get a sense of this even when I speak with my peers, is there is this expectation that your work has to conform to a certain thing. What we're doing, right, is the West is the center. So explain to us. I can tell you in 2026, I mean, look at what's going on globally. Look at BRICS. Look at the development of the global south. If you're writing back to the center, there's no one there. It's you know that story of the eagle, the owl has no horns. I don't know if you heard the folktale. The owl set itself up as the king of the birds, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, look, man, I've got horns. And if you mess with me, I'm just going to go you. Do not mess with me. And everyone's like, whoa, 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 whoa. All right. Until one day when the owl was asleep, this little sparrow then noticed that these are just ears. There's nothing really there. And we are in that historical moment in which that center, it just doesn't exist. Um, Power is shifting elsewhere. And so what we are doing has to change. And I think I've sort of noticed that when I think about contemporary Zimbabwean writing, I can sort of understand which is kind of, the struggle novel that kind of tells it's almost a form of witnessing. And I'm not saying I'm outside of that. I've done something outside of that. If you read The Hairdresser of Harare, it's kind of like this is what Zimbabwe was at a certain period of time. And you get it from Bettina Gapa's work, No Violet Bulawayo, kind of expanding it into the diaspora experience. Novio Chuma's wonderful Kukura Wundi, the genocide novel, House of Stone. If you look at Irene Sabatini's work, you get a sense that we are kind of describing the situation. So it's the post-colonial thing. It kind of also signals to the Western reader that, okay, you're still important, right? Because we're in this mess because you guys came about and you did the thing, and now we are kind of trying to fix things and grappling with the aftermath. So that positionality is understandable to a Western reader. They're still, even if there isn't a Western on the page, they're still at the center of the thing. There might be an absent center, but they set up things in motion. If you look back from about, I'm going to be arbitrary about that, from about Bettina Gapa's collection, Elegy for Easterly, which is wonderful, won I think it was the Guardian First Book Prize, till about Irene Sabatini's Peace and Conflict, her last novel about a boy called Robert, which was set back home. It's kind of, I mean, these novels do a lot of other things, but at the center of them is like the contemporary Zimbabwean experience, a bit of the struggle. But something fundamental breaks down in that form, and you can start seeing the work that comes after that. So, for example, Novio Chuma kind of moves across the way and does digging for stars, looking at indigenous astronomy and sci-fi. It's a very speculative work, even though it's packaged as literary fiction. And so she proposes what could be a potential new direction for us. Bryony Ream, who wrote This September Sun, she moves into genre crime with All Comes to Dust, sort of like working. So this is a literary writer who writes a very, I mean, Ream loves Agatha Christie, and it's a fantastic police procedural. So it's opening up genre. Petina Gapa proposes in Out of Darkness, Shining Light. Let's tap into the history. Let's maybe dig a little bit deeper, and so start looking at the history. So, Out of Darkness, Shining Light. It's the Africans that carried David Livingstone's body back to the coast so he could be repatriated back home. But the story is about them. And Gapa is a lawyer, so very rigorous in terms of the historical documentation, looked at diaries, letters, and things like that to produce that work of historical fiction. So that's a potential new direction. No, Violet Bulawayo goes off and does Glory, which is sort of like an animal fabulistic thing, which is kind of like Animal Farm, but shifts slightly into what we would recognize as the speculative realm. I've gone out into urban fantasy and completely kind of left that. But it kind of shows you that there is some kind of disruption that's gone on. All these writers that have started in near enough the same position are now kind of branching out. It's a sense that you get. Like if you think about music, Shama, right? You can have dope beats, but after a while, the thing no longer works, and the artists start doing something. It just doesn't hit you like that, and then something new comes up, and that's how things go. And so, I think some of the changes in my own work has been if I did a novel like The Hairdresser of Harar now, maybe you'd read it, but you'd be like, yeah, but what else is there to say? So where I've gone with this, and sorry, I riffed off the sovereignty thing, right? I've looked at it and said, okay, there's all these possible directions that are emerging, sort of like different responses, what we could do with our work, but they're all kind of touching the contemporary thing. We were colonized for 90 years, and in historical terms, that's nothing. That's a blink. Right. It doesn't even register on the seismograph. There's this history, and I think that's where kind of Gapa points us to. There's authors like Maza Mangister, Lori Kabuitsile has done historical fiction. Jennifer Makumbi, Jennifer Makumbi has been pointing like we need to go back into the thing. Even Achebe, who started this thing, Achebe was looking back to say, look, there's the history. So we're like, I don't know if you have that thing in Nigeria as well, but in Zimbabwe, right? You can be sitting on a piece of rural communal land and your family's been there for generations, and you sit there, you're doing your farming and whatever, and the government says, no, you need to go, man, because we're getting like the Americans or the Chinese or whoever, there's gold here. So you need to go so that these guys can extract. In a novelistic sense, it feels to me like we're farming. But if you look at sort of like Shona culture, you're looking at about 1,500 years of history. And we're obsessed with this little 90-year thing. So I've had to look back and say, for my next work, fuck that colonial shit. I'm going to go back in the Great Zimbabwe Empire, look at the Torwa Empire, look at the Roji Empire, and write about that time. If we're not doing historical fiction, like there is this goal. Like if you think about your culture, right? The most important thing in your culture, it's not the gold, it's not the oil, it's not that. It's the language that your ancestors gave you. It's their proverbs, it's their worldview, it's the customs that they passed on to you that have survived for 1,000 years for a reason. It's the religion, the indigenous religions that we have that are so important. They have lasted even under the attack of Christianity. They have survived for a reason because they speak to who we are at an authentic level. So I've kind of left all this and I've said, let me dig a little bit deeper and see what's there. And that process for me, I can tell you, man, it's changed me. It has changed me. It's changed because when I was writing from that historical perspective, I even had to change kind of the view because it means from whatever we were at the periphery, now we're at the center of the world because we are descendants of empire builders. And
Mm.
and I think the reason such work is important is as we try to think of ourselves going forward, if we don't think of the foundation that we're set upon and we keep trying all this shit, and this is why we struggle with the democracy and all that shit. We had our own ways of doing things, the clan based
Mm.
system, kinship networks. If we're trying
Mm.
this Western individual thing, I mean, one of the things that I realized at the end of this book, right, was, and I was just writing the story. Remember, when you're writing, you're serving the story. The themes emerge from the story. As I was going back through it and revising and reworking it, I realized that one of the central arguments that I'm making is that, unlike in the Western conception where personhood, right, is Descartes, I think, therefore I am. So you have the individual, and then I can choose to be in a relationship with you, Shama. We have a relationship right now. We are talking, right? But it's from me as an individual, and you are an individual. Two separate things, and we choose to be in this relationship, talking as we are doing. But personhood in Shona culture, And even if you do the whole classic lines from Ubuntu, a person is a person because of people. It is relational. You're a product of your clan. You're a product of the family. You're a product of the network. So it's a relational personhood that is so important. So there's a character in the book that doesn't have a totem, and metaphysically they are not complete because they're like a trading sailor from China who got left behind. I won't kill the story for you, but because they haven't a totem, they don't have the full personhood these other characters have. So I think once we start doing that, we might have a better understanding of ourselves, and we might start rethinking what happens in the future. Because if you look at, I'm going to go into politics a bit now. One of the biggest problems that I find with our leaders, right, in Zimbabwe, there'll be speeches. We have gold, we have diamonds, we have all this shit. It's all material, material. Look at all this material that we have. One thing they will never tell you is we have people, and our people are the most important resource. Because without people, you don't rule anything. I can give you a huge tract of land. If I gave you all of Nigeria, all of Ghana now, and there wasn't one person any day, you're not ruling anything, man. There's nothing for you. So it's relational. So I think if we start thinking in this relational way, it might change the way we operate and how we think and feel about one another. But I've gone on and on. I should stop now.
So many thoughts, so many thoughts. Thank you for giving me the word regional personhood because I could see that in the magistrate entering into Edinburgh, having nobody to like really, would I say, be relational with. Because at the point when we meet him in the novel, he's not talking to his wife. The only people that seem to be with him, I seem to see him as a person were China, his daughter, and Alfonso. And Alfonso Sleazebag, but he still kept Alfonso around because Alfonso was sort of, that person. So I could see how there was this loss of identity he had, and it was by joining, by getting with the MDC that he got, he started getting himself back and all of that. It wasn't even with the money because when he was getting the money, he was like, oh, it disappears, bills and all of that. So yeah, I could see how that is strong. When we move over to the maestro, because my question was, how did you intend the maestro to be read? But going from totemhood and splicing it from individualistic to relational, I think that's like a very good way to see how
Well,
the maestro lived, right?
that is a very, very solid point. I love how you've tied this together
Yeah.
because with the Maestro, right? So this ties in so perfectly what we're doing. The magistrate is trying to rearrange his conditions. So he's had this network before. He's been the center. He's been a magistrate. He's had the family around him. He's been the patriarch, and all that is taken away. And he's got to build a new community because him getting involved in the MDC and politics, it's building a new community around himself. He needs to be useful, because
Yes.
before he was a useful member of the community, and that's an essential part of who he is. And he has to redirect that to something else because he's never going to work in the Scottish courts. They think he operated in a kangaroo court. So the despair that you see in the Maestro, and if I talk about the conditions of the West now, you have nations that are wealthier than at any point in history. All right, they have this great wealth, but the people are the most miserable people. If you think about America right now, the deaths of despair, the drug abuse, and the opioids, and those kind of crises, they kind of take as normal now and they live through. Right, it's because the individualism that they promote is great. In my understanding of this huge identity thing that they have going on, right, is just have your little box. You be the black man. I'm the white cis female, and if we can just break it down and simplify it, so you come in and you say I'm this category, and then somehow like a robot you behave that like that category, and you're happy. It's such a crazy thing, right? But when it's relational, when you have people and family around you, yeah, you can get depressed and stuff, but you've always got someone to talk to before you go pop a pill from a doctor and stuff. And this is, I'm not dissing
Mm.
mental health and medications for mental health. That's important, but I think sometimes that if you have a community around you that is much more useful than a pharmaceutical solution to the issue that you have. There is this wonderful series on Amazon Prime. It's called, I think it's called Undone, and it's about a girl who's having like hallucinations and some psychedelic things.
Hmm.
And obviously, in the Western thing, this is treated as some kind of psychosis that needs to be medicated and fixed. But if you look at indigenous American culture, they'll say, okay, you're getting visits from the spirits, so you're a shaman, and there's a way of handling that, and so you're integrated into society. You might be the guy that does the ritual and talks to the spirits, and it's integrated and it's normalized. There's this fantastic story that I read in the New York Times years ago about a young Haitian man in New York who his father dies and he starts seeing his father's ghost. Now he'd spent most of his life in New York and he's seeing a ghost. Now, if you see a ghost in New York, you've got to get psychiatric care because it's scary. So he's treated for years until he comes into the care of a psychiatrist who'd worked out in Haiti. And he sees the treatments aren't working. This guy is still seeing the ghost. He's freaking out. But this guy had been to Haiti and realized that in Haiti, it's common to see a lost relative that they die, and there's ways of processing that grief, and then you move on. So he kind of has to say to him, like, well, but this is kind of normal where you are from your culture and stuff. And after that, the guy gets better because of that
Hmm.
integration with his culture. So I'm just saying that some of the despair that's here, and you see it in the maestro, because the maestro doesn't have a community around him. He's just a guy that's working, doing his shift, and he spends a lot of time reading books, theorizing ideas, thinking about ideas. Now, ideas are seductive. If you're a reader, you've been in love with books, and at times you can read something that's so powerful it seems realer than real. But if you've got friends that don't read books at all, and you come to them and you're like, oh man, there's this big idea, they'll just laugh at you. Come on, let's go have a drink. Come back down to earth, right? So the Shona word for depression is kufungisisa. So this is rumination. You're thinking, overthinking. Kufunga is thinking, kufungisisa, too much thinking. The maestro is overthinking. Life is there to be lived. We are here to enjoy conversations, have beers with our friends, go watch football, do this. All this high philosophy and literary stuff that he's interested in, it's great, but it can't be the sum total of your life. You're still a human being. Go hang out with your friends, get a girlfriend, do something. But because he's stuck in that and he's unable to connect, if you look at the magistrate and the mathematician, they at least go to those wacky MDC things. Because as wacky and as crazy as those political meetings are, you're still hanging out with people. And then you go off and you go home and you do your thing. The maestro isn't part of that. He doesn't have a community. And so he breaks down and he
Hmm.
disintegrates. And I look now, and the book was published in 2014. I think before the term the deaths of despair was, but I think he has a death of despair because he doesn't have community.
Hmm.
And especially out here, these are things that we have to think about. And even in Africa, as we reconfigure and go through modernity, we really have to seriously think about what we keep and what we discard. Because if we think this is the perfect model, like the thing that they sell, you know how they go about and they bomb other countries to bring you democracy, and you think that's good for you, man, you're gonna be in a world of shit.
Oh. Oh, wow, wow! I think it ties back to what you said, empire building, because I think empire building is different from empire bombing. Because I think the way empires have been built before, you just go to a new place and get a Gatling gun and clear everybody. I think what you just said is making me think that what we are in Africa, a direction that we can take is to step by step, slowly build for the future, slowly, slowly. Because okay,
Yeah,
that's
and it has to be deliberate, and
yeah,
it has to be a
okay.
template that fits our particular and peculiar histories and our own temperaments. Because the idea that everyone wants to be America or Western is completely false. It doesn't work. And I even see this in sort of thinking about my own experiences and my own relatives, right? So I've got family that expands incredible amounts of money sending kids to private schools where they're only taught English, right? And they made gentlemen. Like I went to a former Rhodesian school where we wore little caps and and we spoke in English all the time, and we're supposed to be like little Victorian gentlemen and stuff. So it's a brainwashing thing, right? It comes out, and
Mm.
your parents are really happy because they've paid top dollar for that. But then you go out into the world, and you're quickly reminded you're not that. It's this whole thing about imitation, right? The reason, even if you look at your own work, if it doesn't have your culture, right, it's like music. I know there's a lot of fine sort of Nigerian and Ghanaian rappers, but I don't listen to them, because if I want to listen to rap, I'll listen to an American. But if you give me something new, a new sound, and I don't want to hear someone that sounds American from. But if you take that form and somehow you meld it and you put a bit of yourself in there, now you've got something interesting that I might be willing to tap into and listen to. So it's that thing that our ancestors, they built this world for us. And then all of a sudden we want to say, you know what, we're just going to discard that, and we're just going to start from this level and build something new and shiny. It's never going to work, because there's no foundation for it. So it will crumble. And that's why we really have to think about these things. But we've moved so far from literature to something that's near political.
I would heavily argue that the Maestro, the Magistrate and the Magician is a deeply political book, especially how you bring it out at the end. It is political. Like, I wanted more of Alfonso. Yeah, because I stopped at the place, the first chapter, where I think it was because in the beginning, Alfonso starts off as this idiot. He's just like this guy. And I'm like, what sort of man is this? And I think I paused because it was on reading back that I realized that, okay, there's also a foreshadowing, there were lots of hints that you dropped where he says, the country now uses a system I call voluntary slavery. They used to bring you people in big boats, shackled together. You didn't even need a passport. And then you started refusing and saying you wanted equality. Now you flood your borders looking for work. What do you expect them to do? I've seen it all before many times. Nigerians, Jamaicans, Polishans, Congolans, Russians, Indians, you name it. There's an electrician from Bulawayo, Mdala Firi. Of course, Firi came here with his wife, a nurse. He thought he was going to get an electrician's job. I told him, Firi, this is the civilized world. Forget it. But he didn't listen. No one listens to Alfonso. And at that point, I was like, yeah, I should have known this guy was not the guy. So my question was, because I know you mentioned that this story was plotless, and so there are two things. At which point in the review, in the editing process, did you discover that, oh, okay, this was going to be the plot? Because there is a very strong plot in this novel. It's not that it's not like this big end of the world stakes where we are driving for this
Yeah.
particular thing. There's a lot of character development, which I believe that is like by the American school of thought. If conflict comes from character and a character develops throughout the story to a point, I think that's a very good plot. Character driven plot is really fantastic. So at what point where did you discover that this story had a plot? And then two, how does Wonder Boy become Alfonso? What happens to a man like Wonder Boy to make him Alfonso?
All right. So again, you are right. This novel has a plot. The plotless one is the experimental novel that didn't get published.
Oh,
This
okay,
is a bit
okay,
more of a plot. It's because, so I looked at Paul Auster's New York trilogy that does
okay.
something new to the detective novel. So I took the spy novel as my thing, right? So this novel is a spy novel masquerading as literary fiction. So the main character of this book is Alfonso, who appears like a side character. Because if you're a spy, you're not the center of the story. You kind of just appear, you move events. So if you notice that the original Zimbabwean cover has three faces at the front with a little one at the back, which is Alfonso's face. That's the cover design. So for me, he's the main character. He's pulling strings. Because it's a story of identity. Who shifts identity more than the spy? Right? Because if you're a spy, Shama, you're selling me a completely different version of yourself than I would know. And you're getting this information and you're going to be doing intelligence reports. And then I'm there, I'm like, I spoke with this guy, he's really cool, but I've probably given you away the details, and now my flat is gonna get bombed and I won't even know who's done it. Right? So that's Alfonso for you. And I'm so glad that you caught the foreshadowing, because some people are like, oh, the ending completely didn't get the ending because it's so lightly sprinkled. Then he's the one that drags the magistrate into political stuff. He's the one that arranges the Maestro's funeral. He's the one that messes up Farai. And Farai recognizes him as Wonder Boy, and he makes up some excuse for it. But even at the end of the book, you realize that, he's not the little comedian, the fool, the jester that he was. Even his posture changes, his alertness to the world. And when he's told by his boss that his next mission is in the Congo, he's already reoriented. He's someone else completely, and so he's a professional. And the reason that I put that in there is I have an uncle who was heavily involved in opposition politics, but he used to tell me stories, and he was like, you know what, man, the most prominent among us are just spies, because these are the guys that can go out there and say screw the government because nothing's going to happen to them, right? But they're going to be rallying us, and then we
Mm,
get fucked up. but but they're there with us, right?
mm,
And in a way, if I look at Zimbabwean politics now, and just how effective the state has been in dismantling the opposition piece by piece by piece by piece. So the whole idea is you're still going to have your elections, but they're going to be managed, and you're going to have a choice. You can't say you didn't have a choice. You have a bunch of guys that will come in, and then you go to the ballot, and you get the result. So how do you complain after that? So I see and part of it was the ideas that my uncle, he's late now, may he rest in peace, but he was just saying, yeah, this is how it's gonna be. It's and and we might think that's unique to Zimbabwe, but look at Western democracy now. Does it really matter who you vote for? You vote for Obama, you get war. You vote for Biden, you get war. You vote for Trump, you get war. The system is so complete, but you are given a choice. It's a psychological pressure release valve, right? Because if at least you think you have some power, you wait the 5 years to get another chance, and then you go and you squiggle on the piece of paper, and put it in the ballot, and then we just continue as before. It's brilliant. It is absolutely diabolical, and it's genius.
yeah, yeah. I was laughing all through whenever Alfonso does his shenanigans. I'm laughing. Whenever Farai steps on the screen and he does his, frat boy thing, I'm like, oh my God, he's so funny. At the end, it was just so grim. But, there was a lot of humor still folded in. And I began to wonder, like, what is the shape of Zimbabwean humor? How would I explain this? Okay, I'll start with in Nigeria. In Nigeria, our humor is, I'll describe it as very absurdist, within the range of stupidity to, just realism. So I was wondering, how would you describe Zimbabwean humor? And, did you study that to fit this into this? Because and when we talk about music, because I can't remember any of the artists that, and I read, and I think I wrote it down somewhere. Because between the music and everything, there was a lot of humor that wasn't Scottish, that was Zimbabwean. So yeah, how did you fit that in, and how would you describe Zimbabwean humor if you would do that?
Zimbabwean humor, and thank you for also laying out the contours of Nigerian humor that's absurdist. Zimbabwean humor is dark and inappropriate.
Hmm.
The emotional register is disturbingly off. So I'll give you an example of Patience Tavengwa, who's this fantastic theater director, brought a play. I'm trying to remember the name of the play. She brings this play. I go to see it with my friends, and there's a packed audience in there. And in this play, it's got scenes of political violence that were happening and stuff. Now,
Hmm.
there's this one particular graphic scene where a guy was being given what's called plastic surgery, where you take a plastic bag, you burn it, and you drip that plastic onto someone's skin. Myself and the guys that I went with were laughing. And you can imagine the Scottish audience at this horrific, very poignant scene. We are laughing. And everyone else is still and appropriately disturbed by what's happening in front of them. In fact, throughout the course of this thing, I went to see it twice. The first time with my friends, And because I was with them, we were laughing at really, really, really disturbing stuff. And it completely, it must have been very strange for the Scottish people that were watching this. And so I went back to see it a second time. And this time I went alone. I just wouldn't put myself through that again. And I sat there, and this audience that was mainly Scottish, they kind of had it was a very solemn, serious thing that they watched, whereas we were watching comedy.
Hmm.
So it's a release, right? If because
Hmm.
if if you're in a messed up situation, right now, you can be gloomy and depressed about it. The situation isn't going to change. The only thing that you can change is how you respond to the situation, and that levity
Hmm.
that you get, it kind of relieves a lot of tension. You have to laugh at the face of in the face of despair. This is also the thing that we're talking about. Is, they always do these surveys about the happiest people on earth, and then they get surprised that people in Africa are happier, but we've got all the money and stuff, right? But you need that release valve in which you
Yeah.
realize, like, look, I mean, if you were to get existentialist about it, we are these apes living on a rock somewhere,
Hmm.
just spinning in the vastness of the cosmos, of which most of it is empty. The situation we find in ourselves in is absurd and
Hmm.
ridiculous, and so I think for Zimbabweans it's a way of coping, but the humor, some of it translates, other bits they don't really translate to other cultures, because even I,
Hmm.
having been here this long, I'm just like, yeah, we were laughing inappropriately because that stuff is not funny.
Thank you so much. Okay, so for Farai, I think we've not talked about Farai. I wondered what went into the construction of that character because I saw a bourgeoisie young man who has like a lot of things going for him and wanted to go back to that country. So I wanted to know, like, how did that come about? Because it's quite different from like most of the other Zimbabwean characters I've encountered in many other stories.
Yeah. So for far, I mean, he is an opportunist, right? So he was sat there watching like footage of the Gulf War, thinking, I should have bought stocks in Raytheon and made money from this. All right. So he's pretty cold and calculating in that he's got a sense of humor, but he is also from sort of like an upper middle class family. And so
Hmm.
all this stuff that is happening, he's well insulated from it all. It doesn't
Hmm.
affect him personally. He's just fine. My construction of him is the idea, because again, if you look at the usual migrant fiction, right, we're supposed to feel sorry for the migrants, like, oh my god, they left home, etc. And one of the things that happens is the stripping away of agency from people that are not
Hmm.
white, because a white guy will come to Nigeria to make money. He's a migrant. You know, he'll find work in some industry, or if he's got capital, maybe he starts something up. But he's made a choice to go there. That is no different from a Nigerian guy that comes here and says, you know what, I'm going to bust my gut. And that is a choice. He's made the choice to say, I'm going to seize an opportunity somewhere else. The way the system that we're in works is it strips you of that agency, right? So, and I totally understand this, because as an author, when you go to do events in the West and you're from, they want to feel sorry for you. They want to show you, we're the nice liberals, and then you say, oh yeah, so things are a little bit terrible, and you collect your honorarium and you fuck off. They feel good because they've done something for Africa. They've showed they care. For me, Farai is that emphatic point. He chooses to
Hmm.
be here. But everyone else,
Hmm.
from the Maestro and the Magistrate, they made their choices. Now, in life, the choices we make have costs. The difference between the victim and someone who's sovereign is the victim does not accept the cost of the choice that they made. If you think about psychology, it's that whole locus of control. Is it loci of control? Is it internal or is it external? There's some people that believe that they control their circumstances, and even if things are messed up, they react to them. And then you've got people that are
Hmm.
kind of like, stuff is happening to me, and you get a bit depressed and you want sympathy and stuff. I
Hmm.
tend to want to write about the former rather than the latter, because I don't think the latter is very productive. And this is not to diss anyone's work, because we're all oriented differently. So what I'm stating here is my own artistic preference rather than to say someone else shouldn't do this or that, because we see the world fundamentally differently. And I think this is also the important thing, that realization that the forms, our impulses will take us in different directions. If you market like a victim narrative, the market here will absorb it, right? Because again, it internalizes that thing that you are being acted upon by us. We are the center. We have this great power. And now we feel
Mm.
sorry for you and we welcome you and we accept you as one of our own. But if you come in and you say, "Yeah, I'm a guy I know your system and I'm just going to operate within its confines and see what I can get. But you know what? Treat me as you treat anyone else." You take something away from people, right? And
Mm.
I felt this like I used to tour Germany a lot until I realized like most of the things that I was being sent to, we weren't even talking literature because this were like human rights people. The note that I would speak at was really really off because I didn't perform the role that I was meant to perform, because I would be
Mm.
insisting on talking about, like with you, the conversation is great because we're talking about a work of art. You're deconstructing it and you're saying technically, we've started from technically, this is what you're doing at a mechanical level. And I would get there and they'll want to ask me questions about immigration. So it's really horrible to be away from your people and your culture and stuff. And I would try to bring the conversation to the art to say, can you at
Mm.
least see what I'm doing as an artist? So there was a disconnect there until I stopped
Mm.
touring for a while. I'm not saying they're bad people, but they came for a particular experience that I could not satisfy. And yeah, this
Mm.
is not judging them. So
I
I'm
totally
very
understand.
much about this issue of us thinking of ourselves as sovereign people, because when you think about it that way, you can shape your world within
Mm.
constraints. And there is no one on this planet who's not constrained by something. You can be the
Mm.
wealthiest man in the world, you still experience constraints, right?
Mm.
It's what you do within those constraints, that's your agency. And that's the kind of
Mm.
characters that I'm trying to create in my work.
Wow. Oh. Oh. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you so much for those characters because I really found him. I found him very, very fascinating. Very fascinating, especially when you hold him in contrast, when you hold him, juxtapose him with his roommates, Scott and Brian. It was, I mean, he's not like a really great guy, but I rooted from him for him till the end of the novel. So yeah, that's that's right.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to work with, and those scenes bouncing off with his friends. In my stories, I was even in the historical fantasy thing. There's a guy called Oberesusu who's got his two best friends, and some of the quieter scenes in what's an epic fantasy are just domestic. These guys just drinking and talking absurd stories, and so you always have to have that kind of tension between sort of like the grand. So you've got the ideas of the maestro and the existentialism and some of the darkness, but at some point you've got to come back down to earth and just to be with your people and to commune and the
Mm,
right to talk about absurd stuff, which is what makes us human. And I just find in my own gripes about the publishing industry in the West is they try to remove that from you.
true, true. Yeah, yeah. I did find this novel to be like very, very rebellious against that trope because I think it came out around the time when we had like we need new names, and I just
Mm.
actually read we need new names, and so I was like, oh, this were published at the same time. I think around that time, there's African writing used to have what I called like there was this bug. Like you have to write this, you have to write through this cloud of hardship. There was just always this trauma, which my current readers continue to call trauma porn. The Maestro, the Magistrate and the Magician, it had that, but it's crackled and I really liked it. It was well done. Well done. I don't know why it's not a more popular book because I thought it was like one of your fantasy experiments. But yeah, because the title was misleading. And yes, about the title. I didn't read the summary. I make it a point not to read the summary so that I could enter the book as it was. And at the beginning, when I saw the magistrate, I thought that okay, fantastic. I went Edinburgh, I was like, okay, I'm expecting cloak and a hat, and very soon somebody's going to do some magic. And there was no magic. It was just realistic.
That title is a misnomer. Again,
Ah,
I've talked about the spy novel that presents itself as a literary novel. So the thing you're getting, so the title itself is a lie, because the magistrate isn't a magistrate. The maestro isn't a
Hmm.
maestro in the classic sense of being a genius in some kind of realm of art or music. The mathematician, he's doing an economics PhD. The thing about it is even the novel itself, it might not be a novel. It might be three loosely interconnected novellas that have just been bound up together. So, one of the things that I love doing is I really think about the structure, whether the structure kind of advances the idea that I'm working with within the text. And so I constantly find that I have to change the structure of the novel in order for it to be able to contain my idea, instead of just chapter one, chapter two, chapter three, moving like that. So we have to shift POVs. We never get this kind of stability. And so when you say, why wasn't it as popular, it might just be that the book doesn't resonate to people, because again, if you have craft and you do like a good sort of like conventional structured novel, I think the payoff for the reader is immense, and that is very, very masterful, to do like a good novel that has a beginning, middle, and with a resolution and a conclusion. And if you can even do a happy ending, there's a reason why in Hollywood movies, we all know the hero is going to overcome, right? So there's certain tropes that we come to expect, and if you can wield them effectively and do that for your story, you will do great. My own problem is, I have an awareness of these things, but my impulses just pull me in a different direction. If I could, that's how I would work, because it's very, very masterful, and it can really broaden your readership and your audience, because there is that emotional payoff, because it is a work of art that's supposed to create some kind of emotional response. But when you're drawn to slightly darker themes, I can totally understand if someone would be like, no, this just isn't my thing. But back to Bulawayo's "We Need New Names." I think that novel is masterful in terms of just the use of language that crackles. Man, that the use of language, the conditions are kind of, Zim is messed up, so that's it. But what Blawai does really well, and I've spoken with other people about the book, and they were like, yeah, but the language at the tail end of the novel, it's not as fizzy, and it's like, yeah, but Darling has migrated, right? She had her friends around her, so you had that we voice. They were bouncing off one another. if
Yes.
if you don't have, if you go to a different friend circle, you've got your frames of references, your in jokes and stuff like that.
It
You
switches.
can crackle. But when you're in
Mm.
a different situation, your voice completely changes, or it might get lost at all. And it's something that I've found people like, yeah, but that's kind of what the structure of the novel is. And
Yeah.
it's also doing like really interesting things with sort of like the self-contained, almost short story form of it. It has an experimental quality to it that sometimes gets overlooked, because I think the story is so great that people kind of
Yeah.
are more interested in the story. But in terms of the craft, my God. Yeah.
Yeah. Nah, I was that guy at the book club. I was like, you guys look at the craft, the structure. Oh my god, short stories. She won the Kane Prize that year. And they were all younger than me. So they were like, huh, what is the Kane Prize? And anyway.
You know what,
Anyway.
Chama? And this is the thing on your writing journey. I think, and we, I've spoken about the issues that I had sort of like touring Germany, right?
Yeah.
It's you almost come to this realization, and it's fair that, for a craftsperson, you are looking at something very specific, because you're one of those people that will watch a movie and say, oh, look at this camera angle, oh no, the camera should have been here, oh my god, why did they zoom out there, oh, that cut is too quick. That's a very different experience from the immersive thing where you're like, yeah, that was a nice story. Confess, Shama, right? Think of yourself as a younger reader. You just used to get immersed, and you'd be like, yeah, it was a good book, And if you're forced to write a report about it at school, you'd really struggle. But how has your reading changed? Because you're now looking at the wiring, Has it changed the
Mm.
way you read? Because I find I wish I could go back to the immersiveness that I had at the beginning, where I'll just be in the story. How's your reading changed?
Yeah, it's I can't turn it off. I can't turn off the guy who sees the insight. Be it I'm reading, even if it's a children's story, even if it's a film, as long as it's a complete work of something, even if it's just an academic paper, an essay, somebody's assignment, I'm always looking through. So whenever I step into a writing community, after like 1 month, everyone is like, can you help me edit my story? And I'm like, here we go again. Like, it has also ruined my writing because I was very inspired by, high fantasy that sort of showed the whole Game of Thrones type high fantasy thing. And that's what I started writing. But when I turned to start reading African writing, especially in the heydays of literary fiction, where you had the Chimamanda, we had Hairdresser of Harari from 2010, 2011, and I just started to go more complex. Went to into We Need New Names. Then I read The Famished Road. And I started reading Booker's Prizes. And since then, I whenever I am on the page and I'm writing something that is like my how I view art has advanced far ahead of my craft level at writing. And I keep working on that. But so does my view of literature. So it's like they're just chasing each other. That's why I created a book place so that I could just get all of like, there will be a place where I will sit down and geek about craft and probably even teach craft because I started teaching craft at a point. And
Yeah.
then when it's time, I could just turn my computer off and then pick up my little laptop that's not connected to the internet and go somewhere and write. So I'm waiting for that day. That day has not come. So yeah.
You, the day will come. The day will come. This is one of the difficulties of being a working writer, which is finding the time to do it. And there's no easy solution. There is no easy solution. Whether it's like waking up early just to do an hour because you can do that little chunk, whether it's maybe saying, okay, I'm pressed for time now. I'm just gonna do short stories for now until I get a chunk of time. Whether it's saying, you know what, I'll do a novella or a short 50K novel because this is what my time allows, and I'll hold on to that idea. But you need to come back to high fantasy because if this had been 15 years ago, I'd have been like, yeah, that's gonna be hard. I mean, you've heard stories about geniuses like N.K. Jemisin being told, well, this is black characters, it's not gonna sell. So the ground has been cleared uh, through the work of Lauren Bukis, Nedio Korofa, Tade Thompson, Sui Davis
Mm,
Akimboa.
yeah.
Even what the new generation folks like Wale Talabi are doing is really dope. There's been a clearing of the field. And also, if you look at what Jemison does with the structure of sort of like fantasy, what Okorofa does with their ideas on African futurism, what Thompson does with his sort of like pulp aesthetic fused into this he's sort of like ultra violent futuristic stuff. I think it almost shows that fiction can contain these ideas. So the reading that you've done, if you'd only read sort of like epic fantasy and the high fantasy, what you're going to come out of it at the end of it is derivative Tolkien-esque stuff. So you're
Yeah,
gonna
yeah.
you're gonna give us elves, you're gonna give us orcs, you are going to give us the standard quest narrative. Your hero will be the chosen one, right? That's those tropes. Because again, you are what you eat. But by going outside of the genre like you have done and kind of reading gregariously, it really changes how you view and see things. And so when you come out, you will have your own distinct take on it. You will play with some of these tropes, but your interpretation of them will be very different from when you specialize in the genre. Because if you just specialize in the genre, you could do something that's serviceable, but you
Hmm.
couldn't really give us something new. And again, I'm not dissing this aspect because there's something that is difficult about doing a very well told story that excellently executes the tropes of the genre. That in itself is masterful. But there's also another dimension of someone that comes in and says, well, can we just push it here a little bit, open up a little more ground here? And for me, that's where the magic happens. So I think what you're consuming now and where you've gone off, even your prose style, when you come in, you're probably going to be using literary prose in the epic, like Marlon James did with
Black Leopard, Red Wolf.
exactly. And it's these
Yeah.
things that kind of show you that the genre, if it's allowed to breathe, it can contain all these other forms, and that's where the magic happens. So I would really really hope. I mean, there's cool stuff
Yeah.
happening. Marv Michael Anson. I don't know if you got a copy of Firstborn of the Sun.
Her and I were having a conversation next month. So, like, ending next
No
month.
way. Marv is a beast, man. Marv is a beast.
Yeah.
Really, really
I.
sharp, really focused. Marv grinds. Marv has a work rate. He gives you
Mm,
that aesthetic of like, this is work. I'm gonna put my time in and commitment and do the thing. And what she's done with Firstborn of the Sun, the world building is phenomenal. The
it is.
characterization, like I'm in love with that one called Commander, who's
Hmm.
like one of the dopest kind of like martial female characters I have seen. So it'll be interesting to see what she does with that. So the ground is opening up, and if you come back in, maybe you can give us something radically different as well.
I'll ask two questions before I go, which is music. I think you have this very strong connection with music. I mean, throughout, I found myself wanting to get into that Walkman that the magistrate was with. Tell me about music, especially Zimbabwean music. As in, do you have a playlist that you can send?
So yeah, I mean, music, Zimbabwean music. When we were growing up, it was there. It was all around. We had channels like Radio Two that would play Sungura. But there's this curious thing that happens when you're young and you're stupid, right? Which is on Saturdays there was this what they used to call sounds on Saturday. It became called Coca-Cola on the beat, where you had your Michael Jacksons and your Western music, etc. By the time you're going to school in Harare, where everyone is speaking with a weird accent and trying to be kind of like Black American, the days of wearing FUBU and Huwe and stuff, and listening to gangster rap. So you'd kind of in your peer groups, if you're like, I enjoy Sungura, it'll be like, ew, how can you listen to that? We have to listen to this stuff from abroad. We're international, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing I was in. But this
Oh.
music, when I'd go home to Bindura, this is what would be banging. But I'd already
Hmm.
assimilated that thing of saying, "Oh no, this is local. We need to listen to the international stuff," and it's so
Hmm.
insidious. But the value of it, I only learned it like much later, when this music that's been playing when you're young. And the thing about Sungura is it has a complexity to it. The
Hmm.
musicians are telling you stories about the culture. So we can say that most of the storytelling that happens in Zimbabwe happens within the musical form, because a guy will tell you a story about a story about a breakup, or it could be a crime story, or there's so many different conventions within the genre, but it's heavily
Hmm.
sort of like guitar based sound of it. Now I don't know music theory, and I have to listen to music very, very carefully to try to figure out what it's doing. But I've been blessed to have a friend circle of people that understand music at a fundamental way. Like I have this friend that I hang out with all the time, and you listen to a beat and you think it's fresh and original, and you'll be saying, "Yeah, but this is just riffing off that tune from 1994." He has this encyclopedic knowledge, and he can recognize the patterns. It gets really annoying sometimes, because you'll be thinking I'm listening to something new, and they'll tell you, "Nah, nah, nah, this is just riffing off an old code." They've just slowed
Hmm.
it down. Because of that, I appreciate the music. I'm more heavily interested in the lyrics, in trying to decipher them, because I understand words much better than I do sounds. But then I have
Hmm.
that support network around me, in which you can sit together and he'll say, "Oh, do you hear this? Or do you hear this ping, ping, ping?" Right at the back of the composition, that's layered, and that's the whole thing that's holding the composition together. So Sungura kind of it was huge when I was growing up. But then we had the HIV/AIDS pandemic, and these guys
Hmm.
were just dropping like flies, man. It was just so upset. So it lost a lot of momentum. But we're also at a time where this is around the to early 2000s where everything is going digital. Now kids on their laptops, you can learn an instrument. You need to bring guys around to build the band, or you can
Mm.
have your computer and your synths and make an so urban grooves comes about, and it's a new sound, and gradually there are still people playing sungura, but the young people now are doing like zim dancehall and kind
Mm.
of like a Zimbabwean kind of hip hop, so the sound has changed. My only hope though is for some of these young people to start doing what in Afrobeats, how they kind of riff off sort of like the old sound that Fata Rolling Dollar and Fela Kuti, and they change it. I think our artists aren't doing enough in that of bringing in some of those interesting old sounds into this new form that they're working. But Sungura music, that just speaks to my soul. I'll send you a playlist.
Thank you. I would, because it feels like it does get into a little bit of your writing. I haven't figured out how, but at the place where I'm seeing how, and I'm seeing how like those Zimbabwean words in the Latin script, yeah, just gliding on the page. I'm like, I think I could use that, because you also did work as a translator. I even forgot. Yeah, how is it like translating? And I'm curious as to how that has affected your writing, because I do have dreams of being a translator somehow, someday. When I'm older, when I'm much older, anyway. So yeah, how does that change your writing? I'm really curious. Does it improve you? Does it destroy something? Does it take anything away from you?
Oh no, it really, really, I mean, if you can, you really should get into it because it shows you that the structure of language is so intricate but so specific.
Hmm.
If I ask you to translate one of these lines, that any line from the conversation that we've been having,
Mm-hmm.
you actually struggle in rendering it in another language because, okay,
Definitely.
do I just take the meaning but then I lose the cadence? What
Yeah.
do I get to, what remains and what is lost, and even the word choices that you use, particularly if ever you want a mind thing, translate a sci-fi story into another language, it will just, the tricks that you have to do to convey some of this stuff is incredible. It also gets you to get into the groove and the pocket and the rhythm of language. This is why we need new names. The English sounds completely different because Bulawayo has
Yeah.
this great command of Ndebele, and so she can rework the English language. I mean, Brian Chikwawa's new novel Shamiso pulls a similar trick, sort of like
Hmm.
reworking English into a Shona sounding cadence. Most of it you are playing by feel. And one of the things that we have to understand is translators have different styles, right? So if you and I are translating a text, let's say we're both translating this text into Gikuyu and we speak Gikuyu, you can come out with a completely different version. And it's a
Hmm.
work of art that stands on its own. And if you like classic literature, have you heard of the new translation by Emily Wilson of the Iliad?
Yes.
People
Yes.
have been going crazy about that.
Yeah.
Now, you might ask, why would someone, it's been translated before, but she's come in with something new. So when you translate, it's your own work of art that you have to stand behind, and it kind of signals
Hmm.
some of like your preference. Something is lost, something is gained within doing that. But it is very
Hmm.
enriching because if at some point you want to fuse different languages into the text, then if you translate, you have a better ear for those rhythms. And it's
Wow.
fun. It's fun. It's
Yeah.
a challenge. I just wish that we took our languages more seriously in terms of putting funding into there and making sure that there are people working in this area. Because as writers, there is a commercial reality behind what it is we're doing, and there's a material reality to it. And I think the state can signal its preferences by just making these small changes, and not just in literature. It could even be in the signs that you have in government departments, making sure that translators are getting that work to do. It signals that this is important to power, and people respond to
Hmm.
incentives.
Hmm.
But we've got some way to go there. But I think the most important thing, if we just come down from that power thing, is on your own at your own local level. It's finding what you can do. It's that is it Wangiri Muthai's "I'll Be a Hummingbird" story? where there's a big forest fire, but you're the hummingbird and you pick up a drop of water and you put it on there because that's the best you can. And that's what we should all be doing.
Thank you so much. I was going to. Okay, so I think I'll just give a last question just before I go. I
Yeah.
think, but yeah, I wish I had budgeted more time. But then again, there would definitely be a lot more time. So I guess okay. I once had a chat with the writer that said that he won't waste his time translating things to his own language because it's not commercially viable. I just wanted to
Mm.
get your thoughts on that. I personally believe that just translating things to language for archival purposes and stuff. But I wanted to know what would make you, aside from commercial gain, translate something into your language. Like, what are the other gains apart from the fact that okay, it's not commercially viable? Something like that. I think I'm still rolling that in my head.
A lot of it is what moves us. So we've talked about the commercial dimension, and that material reality is very important and we can't neglect it. But not everything that we do is because of money, right? If there's a particular text that I'm really passionate about, and it presents a certain kind of challenge for me, I
Hmm.
would like to take it on. If I have a time slot and I want to do some of it, it's the pleasure of doing it, right? And this is the thing about art, because the beauty of art is when it's you on your laptop doing your thing. That's when you
Mm.
get flow, and that in itself is a reward on its own. And
Mm.
this isn't to say, at a different stage in a writer's career, you might have a bit more time to take on some of these passion projects because you know the bills are paid and you don't have to worry about that. Um,
Oh.
but even when you can just take a little bit of time and start on something bit by bit, I think that in itself, it's a thing, because we talk about our languages a lot at at different festivals and things like that. But at some point, what's more important is just demonstrating that this can be done, and you just do
Yeah.
your little bit, and that translation that you do, it might be read by 5 or 10 people. Maybe one of those 5 people is some young kid that kind of realizes, oh, this can be done, and you don't know where
Mm.
they're going to be in another 5 or 10 years time. And this is how
Mm.
we transmit knowledge, and you start thinking about this a lot when you kind of hit middle age. It becomes, okay, what's my legacy, what's my
Mm.
contribution to the culture that has rewarded me by giving me materials that I've used to earn my income. And we all come to different decisions on this depending on our circumstances. But I would say once you've done it, you get hooked because of the challenge. And you enjoy that thing of rendering and creating a new work of art that is as close to something else as it is, because a translation is its own work of art. And I'm
Yeah.
so glad that certain book prices recognize that, in which the translator gets half the price and the author gets half. That recognition that what the translator did makes it possible. And because if we did that, I think there would be room for. There's a country that I went to, Slovenia, and what they have there is anyone that publishes a book locally in their local language, there's a grant from the government for it to be translated into English or French or German, and so that they can try to sell the rights or to self-publish a version of it online. So there's a constant stream of work for translators that is there. But it also encourages the authors to be working in these languages. So there has to be that. But without that level of organization, it might be just going back. And this is one of the things that I've been intending for years, and I've just not made more ground because I've been publishing a book a year. But when my schedule slows down, they sort of like these old Shona classic, and we call them novels, but they
Mm.
were taught in school and they're really novellas. And it might just be taking one of those and grinding out over 3 months and doing it English and in English and seeing what happens. That's the direction that I want to go down with this. And
Mm.
it's for the love. Even if it's just going to be a PDF or a Word document on my laptop, that's still okay. Nothing is ever wasted.
Okay, thank you so much. This has been fun. There's been just so much wisdom, and I don't know. I think after this chat, personally, I feel a lot. I feel a lot more confident in my identity as an African literate, to be precise, or rather, yeah, and and the conversation should not be because right now in Nigeria we're going through like a very commercial phase where we are publishing a lot of commercial books, and pressure on me to be a lot more commercial, to be more commercial. But having you and realizing that still sticking with literature is one way, and just taking time to just grow. I think it has filled me with a lot of hope and so much. I'm looking forward to what I'll write, and I believe that my listeners and my fellow readers would vibe with this. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for being open, and
Thank you.
yeah, you're one of my goats. So yeah,
Thank you so much, Shama. This has been
yes,
a masterful interview. I know there is craft in doing an interview and keeping someone gobby for 2 hours. The long form is it's nice when you see it being done, but I couldn't sit with someone and kind of hold their attention for this long. I didn't even feel the time go by. So thank you for having me, and thank you for this exchange of ideas we've been having. I really appreciate it.
I come to your temple, Peter. Thanks is all mine.
Enjoy the
Mhm.
rest of your day, and let's catch up via email.
Definitely enjoy the rest of your day too. Thank you so much.
All right, you take care, brother.
Yeah, bye bye. Take care.